Gale force winds would force the sailors to jump out of the aircraft at more than twice the wind speeds of what would have normally canceled the jump. On top of that, they were in the middle of a solar storm, which could block radio communications to support units for hours.
How's it going, troops? Welcome back to a new video. Sorry, Biz, not been as many uploads recently. I have been away for the past week, but we are back getting to a regular schedule upload. We are looking at the hostage rescue of Jessica Buchanan. This is SEAL Team 6 going in. When I first saw the title, I was wondering, okay, SEAL Teams, Delta, but being SEAL Team 6, that level above your standard sort of Navy SEALs. So interesting to see what the video's got to say and how the hostage rescue happened. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe to Combat Ready HQ and check out the original video in the description. But let's get into it.
The Navy SEALs clenched their fists as they heard Jessica Buchanan desperately pleading for her life. The American teacher had participated in a demining project in Somalia before being kidnapped by several pirates. Now she lay sick and starving somewhere in the desert, defenseless against the whims of her heavily armed captors. The operators of the famous SEAL Team 6 would do everything to save her. But one bad piece of news followed the next. Gale force winds would force the sailors to jump out of the aircraft at more than twice the wind speeds of what would have normally canceled the jump. On top of that, they were in the middle of a solar storm, which could block radio communications to support units for hours. The SEALs would have...
So not the best start to the operation, but these being Special Forces guys at the top of their game, okay? These are pretty much some of the best, tier one, as you could say, within the US military, right alongside Delta. These guys train for situations like this, so they're free fall in pretty much most conditions. And when it comes to hostage rescue, they're mostly like, this is our only chance to go, so let's go. They would have weighed up the risk versus the reward when it comes to those situations, but that's why these guys are paid the mega bucks.
To prove that they were among the best before they even touched the ground. Any other mission would have been delayed by at least a day, but the warriors knew Jessica didn't have those 24 hours. And so they donned their parachutes, checked their oxygen tanks, and then jumped into the unknown darkness and one of the most daring hostage rescues ever.
So what they're doing there is, if you've not heard of it, they're either doing Halo or Hey-Ho. High altitude, low opening, or high altitude, high opening. Can't really tell from that. All you can tell is that they're free falling. So basically, they're going to go up most probably to around 30,000 feet, maybe less. And then they're going to jump out, free fall. High altitude, low opening is they're going to go as low as possible, then open their parachute. High altitude, high opening, they're going to jump, pretty much open the parachute instantly, and then come down under canopy.
Jessica Buchanan was 32 years old and living with her husband in one of the safer areas of Somalia. Together with her Danish colleague, Paul Thisted, she worked for a large aid organization, educating children about the dangers of anti-personnel mines that were widespread throughout the country. On her next assignment, she had to travel dangerously close to the so-called Green Line, an invisible line behind which lay the areas controlled by Islamists. The security situation in the Horn of Africa was already tense as it was, with bomb attacks and small skirmishes between rival tribes occurring almost regularly. However, Jessica had not come to Africa to hide behind walls, so she decided to conduct the anti-mine training anyway. At first, everything seemed to go without incident. But on October 25th, 2011, the day of their return trip, everything was about to change for the two humanitarian workers.
Not going to say it's her fault, because what she went through, we'll find out, is most probably horrendous. But when they say living or staying in the safer part of Somalia, it's still a very dangerous country. It's not exactly the safe. Okay, going into, say, Mogadishu airport is highly dangerous just flying into the airport. As soon as you leave that airport, the risk is even higher of something possibly happening to you. It's a very dangerous place to go. So going there without a lot of security, I know they're trying to do good, do humanitarian sort of aid, and help, but you really are putting your life in danger just entering that country. So I'm not really surprised. The stories I've heard, I've been to the airport, it's just risky enough just going to the airport, but leaving the airport, you could even get shot. Just walking down the street, okay, you could get attacked, you could get kidnapped. So you've got to be really careful when out there, and I would, if you go into that country, I wouldn't leave the airport unless I had security, no matter where I was going in the country.
The first thing that struck Jessica as suspicious was her driver. Instead of their usual chauffeur, a completely unknown man was sitting in the Land Cruiser who was supposed to take them to the airport. Her Danish colleague, however, seemed to be in a hurry and climbed into the passenger seat unimpressed, which is why Jessica stopped worrying. Then, after only 10 minutes of driving, it happened. A massive car forced the convoy to an abrupt halt. Nearly 30 men with AK-47 assault rifles jumped out of several vehicles, banging on the Land Cruiser's windows and yelling orders in a language Jessica didn't understand. Before she could even realize what was happening to her, one of the pirates pointed his gun to her head while her security advisor was violently dragged from the vehicle. A heavily armed man sat down in the vacant seat and gave orders to Jessica's driver, who willingly hit the gas and showed who he was really working for. It wasn't long before they stopped again and switched vehicles amid loud shouting from the pirates. The whole thing seemed very well planned, although the kidnappers had obviously consumed too much khat, a plant common in Africa which acts similar to amphetamines. After the pirates
Straight away, okay, if you're in a situation like this, trust your gut feeling. Your gut feeling is normally right. If your gut feeling says, I shouldn't get in a car, don't get in just because someone else got in. Next, the fear that must have gone through her when that car pulled up. It's always a Toyota. You can trust the Toyota. The fear that must have been going through their minds and through their body must have been terrifying. So in that situation, what do you do when 30 armed men come at you? Okay, you obey. Okay, you listen to them and you do as they say. There's no point fighting it. You've got no weapons, you've got no training, just do as they say.
Stopped in the middle of nowhere, Jessica and Paul had to prepare their own execution, only to be sent back to the car just before their tragic end. The pirates didn't care at all about the lives of the relief workers, but in order to collect the highest possible ransom, they needed their hostages unharmed. For them, it was fun to mock the powerlessness of the West on the other side of the world. Jessica and Paul, meanwhile, were living their nightmare. They could do nothing, as they were at the mercy of the barbarians and didn't even know if anyone had noticed their disappearance. But Washington was not only aware of the abduction of the humanitarian workers, it had already initiated first countermeasures. Jessica's aid organization had notified the American embassy in Nairobi immediately after the assault, which in turn informed the FBI. From here, phone calls were made to family members to reassure them and dissuade them from acting rashly. Even before the end of the day, high-ranking officials briefed U.S. President Barack Obama, and while the pirates were preparing to contact authorities, Jessica Buchanan was already a top priority at the White House. Paul Fisted later recounted that the best thing that could have happened to him was to be kidnapped with an American. Both hostages and pirates were soon to find out what that meant.
So let's break that down. First of all, okay, they were taken out of the car and they had to prepare their own execution and then put it back in the car. Okay, this is done on purpose. Okay, yes, one, it's to mock you, but it's also to break you mentally. Okay, to torture you, to slowly break you down. So you literally do as they say. It's a well-known technique when you get kidnapped by sort of these pirates and other similar groups. Is they will, take you to a room. You'll stay in that room. They will then take you out, prepare you for execution, then put you back. And they repeatedly do that because after a while it breaks you down and breaks you down. And that's what they want. They want to just keep breaking you down mentally so you constantly obey them and you listen to them. And then the weaker you are, the less chance there is of you sort of escaping and fighting. And also it is to humiliate you.
Months later, Jessica was still in captivity. Good news was that she was still alive. Bad news was that despite slow negotiations, no agreement could be made for a ransom, as the pirates had even refused $1.5 million.
Jesus,
enough money
that's a
that
lot
each
of
of them
money.
would be set up for at least 30 years.
Set him up for
Every day,
life.
Jessica fought hunger, heat, and the constant fear that the kidnappers would harm her. As if all of that wasn't bad enough, a urinary tract infection had spread through her body, and in the worst-case scenario, it could be fatal. In a final video message to Western authorities, she joined Paul in begging for their lives and a quick payment of the ransom. Otherwise, she would either die from her infection or fall victim to the whims of pirates drugged with khat. That night, Jessica gazed up at the brightly lit starry sky and prayed. Unbeknownst to her, her prayers were answered when 10,000 miles away, 24 cell phones suddenly rang. The men picking up the phones had long beards and were covered with tattoos. Some of them had the stature of a bear,
That's one way to
while
describe
others looked
them.
like hardened marathon runners. But they all had one thing in common: their aura of absolute calm, self-confidence, and professionalism. They were all part of the famous SEAL Team 6, who had just been alerted for a hostage rescue. Over the next few weeks, SEAL Team 6's Blue Squadron trained day and night to rescue Jessica, her pleading voice from the video message always in the back of their minds. The warriors had hunted gruesome men all over the world, but when it came to the lives of women and children, they were especially motivated. On January 25, 2012, the time had finally come. President Obama himself had given the green light for the hostage rescue. 24 of the best warriors the U.S. had to offer would risk their lives to try to free both hostages unharmed. Their plan was to parachute over Somalia and then approach the pirate camp on foot so as not to alert the enemy with loud noises. At the U.S. operations base in Djibouti, around 500 miles from Jessica's location, everything military-related which was useful in some way was gathered. At this point, the total operation cost was already well over $100 million. That was how much America was willing to spend to save just one citizen. With final
I
preparation...
don't know where they got that number from, 100 million. But yeah, you know, it might have... Obviously, you got aircraft, the cost of the guys, the kit and equipment they're using, the munitions, parachutes, the negotiations. 100 million's a lot.
completed, the SEALs boarded their C-130 transport aircraft and took off for Mogadishu.
C-130, standard sort of
the pilots
aircraft.
themselves
Brilliant
had only
aircraft.
just
this.
arrived and had been on a 9-hour flight right before, but performed their job just like business as usual. All eyes, including those of the president, who was monitoring the operation via live feed, were now on the hostage rescue. As it turned out later, the kidnappers wanted to change their position on exactly this night, but had eaten spoiled meat and therefore ended up staying put. On the other side, however, a violent solar storm erupted, which hit the Earth's magnetic field so hard that radio waves, and thus radio communications with other support units, were disrupted. Meaning, in a worst-case scenario, no quick reaction force, no situation reports, and no close air support. On top of that, wind speeds were more than double what would have canceled a regular mission. But the rescue of Jessica Buchanan was not a regular mission, and every one of the 24 men on board was willing to take that extra risk. After about 3 hours in the air, the C-130 had reached their drop point. The SEALs rose from their seats, hooked up their oxygen tanks, and then dropped from more than 20,000 feet into the 40-knot wind.
So they did a halo.
After only a few seconds of free fall, the operators had already reached 120 miles per hour, a speed which is normally achieved by competitive athletes in optimal conditions. Despite the absurd wind situation, the SEALs managed to land semi-cohesively, with a few runaways who were dragged across the savannah for hundreds of yards before separating from the parachute. Holding security for each other, the sailors put on their combat gear and wrapped up their chutes. From now on, they had to walk several miles through the more than 100-degree hot Somali night. After nearly an hour of silent marching, the sailors reached their last cover before irreversibly committing to the assault. They were now only 500 meters from the pirate camp. Along the way, they had changed direction several times to always have the wind in their faces, eliminating any possibility of being spotted early. Every little detail counted when it came to sneaking as close as possible to the enemy. A hostage rescue differs from normal combat mission in that the hostage's life is even more important than fighting the enemy. The SEALs would literally run through machine gun fire if it meant they could save Jessica. Their goal...
That's their job, okay? So first of all, jumping out in strong winds, that's what they're going to do. Like I said, these guys get paid megabucks, they're adrenaline junkies, and they would have practiced free fall thousands of times, hundreds of times. They practice their jobs daily. They're the best at what they do. These are the best picked from Navy SEALs selection to go into SEAL Team 6, parallel to sort of Delta. It's their job. They are adrenaline junkies. Yes, it's not just about women and children. It's just their job. They love what they do. They want to go and do hostage rescue. They love being in the military. They love getting in gunfights. So yeah, they will run around being engaged because that's what they do, and that's their job. Patrolling for an hour isn't very long. They're sort of making out that they've gone through this really tough sort of patrolling. They would have been carrying quite a bit of kit, but the kit these guys get, chest plate carriers, weapon systems, relatively light, helmets, relatively light, but it still is a lot of kit to carry. They would have gone in as minimal kit as possible to be as quiet as possible. Changing direction because of wind, I don't know. I don't think they would have done that. I've never really heard of anyone doing that because they don't want to get smelt. But they would have selected the best route in so they wouldn't silhouette themselves, etc., so they don't get seen. And they most probably would have tried to go as light as possible, but take the kit that they do need so they can move as fast but as quietly as possible.
Was to remain undetected for as long as possible. Then speed was of the essence.
Speed and surprise, okay? You want to surprise them, okay? There's no point in them knowing you're coming.
As the 24 warriors began to move again, the longest hour of their lives was about to begin. They had long been within earshot of the pirates, and only night's darkness kept them from the attention of enemy guards. As if in slow motion, one foot was silently placed forward, the weight shifted, and only then followed the next foot. An experienced SEAL named Justin Sheffield led the group. At his hand signal, the operators spread out far to the left and right to bring as many rifles forward as possible without walking into others' field of fire. Snipers positioned themselves on the outer flanks and monitored their comrades' actions. As the sailors moved forward in perfect unison, they could watch through their thermal scopes as the enemy sentries slowly became anxious and woke the other pirates. The SEALs quickened their pace, still perfectly steady. Sheffield aimed his laser at one of the Somali guards, and without having to say anything, his comrades did the same. The infrared beam was completely invisible to the pirates without night vision, but they sensed something moving in the darkness. With a loud clack, they racked their heavy PKM machine guns and got into position. The pirates pointed their weapons roughly in the direction from which they heard the sounds. The SEALs increased their pace once again, now less concerned with noise discipline than with closing the distance to the hostages before all hell broke loose. With a deafening noise, the pirates' machine gun kicked off and fired deadly 7.62 millimeter rounds at the operators, followed by several AK-47 assault rifles. The snipers had been waiting for just this moment and almost immediately silenced the enemy machine guns before seeking new targets. With surgical precision, the Navy SEALs returned fire while simultaneously fighting their way forward to find Jessica. In a similar hostage rescue, French special forces failed to overwhelm the hostiles quickly enough, resulting in the execution of the hostage. Each of the SEALs was prepared to do anything to avoid just that. The hundreds of hours on the shooting range under simulated stress conditions paid off when they spotted two pirates with AKs standing right over Jessica, who was crouched on the ground. Sheffield and another SEAL broke away from the formation, and both made sure these pirates never kidnapped anyone again with accurate shots. When Sheffield saw...
So with these top tier guys, the way they shoot is just on another level. I've seen UK Special Forces do it, 22 SAS. Obviously, they've got better night vision. The pirates wouldn't have had any night vision. The night vision these guys use are just well above what your standard sort of soldier is using. They're amazing, the best of the best you can get on the market. Weapon systems, the best you can get on the market. They also spend 100 times more time on the ranges, urban environments, raw environments, standard sort of CQB ranges, live firing exercises than any other sort of standard sort of infantry guy. So they're marksmen, they're shooting on the move, shooting in sort of prone position, kneeling position, standing position is well above anyone else. So they're hitting a first round target where they need to hit, whether that's in the chest or in the head, they're going to hit it. So they've obviously got the upper hand with the training, the kit and the equipment. So that's definitely going to help them move forwards. So when he was saying as well that they spread out left and right, so what they most probably would have done, whether they released the details or not, they would have got into a baseline, because they would have been, that's the best formation moving forward. They would have moved silently, and then that's more rifles basically pointing at the target for when they open fire, instead of sort of being a staggered or an arrowhead where people are sort of behind and they're in your line of fire. So that's where they would have done that.
The American's bright
These
face,
guys can
he
shoot.
dove on top of her in the ongoing firefight, shielding her from the enemy crossfire with his own body. More SEALs joined in, and within seconds the teacher was protected by multiple layers of the world's best warriors. Although the operators themselves all had wives and children, they put the hostage's life above their own. Meanwhile, another comrade had taken care of Paul Thisted, protecting him from enemy fire as well. After all 9 pirates were neutralized and the gunfire stopped, Sheffield put Jessica on his shoulders and sprinted out of the pirate camp, as far away from any danger as possible. The other SEALs formed a human shield around the two, ready to resume the fight at any moment. After running as far as his feet would carry him after this energy-sapping battle, Sheffield dropped Jessica off. Pararescue jumpers, the U.S. Air Force's specialized rescue force, tended to the American woman, who still couldn't believe she had just been rescued by her countrymen. As she anxiously asked, "What if more come? More could come." Sheffield coldly replied, "We are SEAL Team 6. We will kill anyone who tries to harm you now." Visibly reassured by that convincing answer of the bearded warrior who had just rescued her from the worst situation of her life. After the SEALs blew up the pirates' arms depot, they still had to march to the landing zone of the exfiltration helicopter. Whenever a suspicious noise was heard somewhere, or reports of enemies came in over the radio, it took only a few seconds for Jessica to find herself under a layer of Navy SEALs trying to protect her with their own bodies. Fortunately, however, there was no more fighting, and the American, accompanied by the SEALs, ran independently to the Black Hawk that would fly her to freedom. Behind her lay 3 months of captivity among heavily armed pirates, during which she could never be sure that she would live to see the next day. The selfless efforts of the men of SEAL Team 6 had finally saved her. As she reflected on the last few months, one of the soldiers on board knelt beside Jessica, looked her in the eye, handed her a beautifully folded American flag, and said, "Welcome home, Jessica." For those who have made it this far, thanks for watching. If you want to support our work, feel free to leave a
Really good video. Found it very interesting. Some of the words towards the end, a bit cheesy, but an absolute brilliant video. So go and check out the original video in the description. What Jessica went through, absolutely horrendous. I don't think anyone can imagine what she went through unless you've been through it, okay? That initial gut feeling, if it's telling you, if you're in a country like that and your gut feelings most probably telling you don't get in the car, don't get in the car. It's most probably going to be bad if that's, your gut is right a lot of the time. And if you're meant to be getting in this car and you don't recognize the driver and you're in a country like this, do some sort of checks, ask questions, or just don't get in the car, jump on the phone straight away and try and figure out what's going on. Secondly, SEAL Team 6, like I said, some of the best in the world. They are the best selected from within Navy SEALs. Go for a selection and go for a lot more thorough, in-depth training to do what they need to do. Okay, they're sort of par to the Delta Force, similar to the SBS SAS. And then what they did is what they would have done. Okay, they are going to jump in high winds, they are going to free fall. The move in sounds like they got into a baseline, took up firing positions, engaged back. As soon as they opened fire, sniper would have already been in position, would have already had their targets in sights, and would have engaged as soon as they either opened fire or the commander gave them the order to open fire, depending on sort of rules of engagement or what the plan was. When going in, they would have got to Jessica. They would have asked her a few questions. Jessica most probably asked her a few questions just to make sure it is Jessica. Even though you can sort of see her, it's dark, and they always, ask questions just to confirm it is you. Same with Paul, the Danish guy. They then would have withdrawn. They wouldn't have shielded her with their bodies as such. They would have been in an all-round defence, security for her and him, but also those guys. So they had all-round defence just in case they were engaged again. They had all arcs covered. They would have then withdrew to sort of the landing zone, as they said, waited for the Black Hawk. They would have once again got in all-round defence or some sort of similar formation to provide security for them. The helicopter and Jessica and Paul, okay, they're not exactly like lying on her, like 6 of them, shielding her from bullets. They would have had a low down and they would have been providing security. That's how it would have worked. They then would have got on the helicopter and got out. But really interesting story. Honestly, my advice is, if you're going to go to Somalia, make sure you've got some sort of security. Be careful when going there, even in, the safe areas. It's a very dangerous country. Even just leaving the airport is extremely dangerous. And if you do get into a situation like this, depending on where you're from, but SEAL Team 6, Delta, UKSF, SAS, SBS are the guys you want to come and rescue you. Honestly, they do this day in, day out. As they said, they're willing to put themselves in front of bullets for you, or most people wouldn't say it the way they worded it, but they love doing their job, they love fighting for their country, and they do it day in, day out, and they're willing to put their life on the line and do things, as I always say, do things that most people aren't willing to do to protect you and others. But like I said, absolutely brilliant video. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to Combat Ready HQ, and I'll see you soon.